The Global Conservation Corps presents the Rhino Man Podcast. I'm John Jerko, your host, and one of the directors of Rhino Man the Movie. This podcast series is a way for me to interview top conservationists on the topics of rhinos, the poaching crisis, the importance of rangers, and community engagement, all as a way to create awareness around these issues and to promote the coming release of our documentary film. In this episode, I'm talking with Andrew Campbell. Andrew grew up on a farm in the Kwazulu-Natal Midlands in the shadows of the iconic uKhahlamba-Drakensberg Park. He spent much of his youth exploring these lands and many of the protected areas of South Africa. Andrew comes from a long lineage of conservationists. He began his career as a guide in places like the Dubai Desert Conservation Reserve, Sabi Sands, Mala Mala, and Phinda Private Game Reserve. Andrew is currently the Chief Executive Officer of the Game Rangers Association of Africa and the Executive Director of Conservation Matters. In this conversation, we dive into Andrew's early days growing up in and around the bush. We talk about some of his early inspirations and his path into conservation. We learn about his eventual connection to the Game Rangers Association of Africa, and we dive into what GRAA is doing for rangers, the importance of rangers, the many roles rangers play in conservation, and some of the challenges they face in Africa, along with many of the solutions that are making a difference. This one is full of stories and passion and love for the rangers. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Andrew. All right, welcome to the show, Andrew. So good to have you. Really appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, thanks, John. Good to be here and happy to share some stories.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a couple of nice conversations about rangers and the work you're doing offline or outside of this conversation, but it'll be nice to really dive into that with more depth today and also kind of learn a little bit about your background. But before we start, maybe you can kind of just introduce yourself, what's the organization you're working with, and give us kind of a brief overview of what you're doing.
Sure, John. Yeah. So obviously my name's Andrew Campbell. I work as the Chief Executive Officer at the Game Rangers Association of Africa, which is a regional ranger association, obviously under the International Ranger Federation. And we based our NGOs registered in South Africa. We're 52 years old. So we've been around for a while. I think, at the top of my head, I think we're the second oldest ranger association in the world. And we work to support rangers across the continent. We obviously registered as an NGO in South Africa itself. This is where the organization started in 1970, but we work with rangers across the continent.
Yeah, that's really great. And I want to dive in deep into kind of the story of Game Rangers Association of Africa, what association kind of means, and the importance of rangers and what you're doing in a lot of depth. But before we get there, I'd love to take a step back and kind of learn more about your connection to conservation. How did you originally get connected to conservation? What's your story?
Yeah, John, so it's an interesting one, I guess, and happy to share it. So I grew up in KwaZulu-Natal. Our family came out to South Africa in 1850 and had a history of farming and working in different conservation endeavors, helping establish places like the Sabi Sands. My great-grandfather's involved in that. And so I guess grew up in a family that was, well-versed in the realities of conservation in Africa. And growing up on a farm, spent a lot of time outdoors, exploring the Natal Midlands, as it was called. Our farm was in the sort of shadow of the uKhahlamba-Drakensberg World Heritage Site. So beautiful outdoor environment to do things like fish and horse ride and walk and explore as a young kid. So it was an easy sort of transition for me. I never really gave it too much thought. We holidayed a lot in game reserves around the country and elsewhere in Southern Africa as well. We're privileged to be able to explore some of these amazing parts of Africa, and always had a love for the bush and the wildlife of Africa. And as I said, it didn't take too much thought to sort of end up working in this sphere. It's something that, I guess hearing stories, my dad, what he got up to as a kid in these places, and even my grandfather as well, and reading the...
Do you have any of those stories that kind of stand out of maybe even your grandfather's time that's stick in your mind, as a kid kind of sitting there listening and just like dreaming about what that experience was like?
Yeah, I remember finding a sort of handwritten diary actually on the farm, sort of tucked away in one of the bookshelves, which was my grandfather's diary of sightings and various things that he had seen at the Sabi Sands. And, this is going back into the 40s and 50s, packs of 60 plus wild dogs, for example, and just all these sort of old memories of his. And then some of the sort of characterful stories, I guess, of some of the endeavors. In those days, there was obviously in some of the areas dating back to the 20s, hunting and some of these stories of going out there and having to explore these areas and take other people to, on these hunts and things like that. And then these sort of wild endeavors that they got up to in those days. And I always found it just fascinating hearing these stories. And in those days, it was pretty harsh and tough environments. None of the luxuries that we get to have today. Yeah, it made for some incredible adventures, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And so, leading from there, actually, before I get to this, what's that area growing up? What's it like for people that haven't been to South Africa? Can you kind of just paint a picture of what the landscape's like where you grew up?
Yeah, so it's quite open grassland areas. Quite mountainous from a South African point of view. It doesn't compare to some of the mountains you get over in the States or in Asia. But Drakensberg is the biggest mountain range we have in Southern Africa. And we were sort of in the foothills of those. So, beautiful rolling hills, a fair amount of rainfall, so generally good grass cover, not many trees, and then beautiful river systems, coming out of the Drakensberg and flowing down towards the coast. So good fishing. It was actually the area where they first introduced brown trout in South Africa in the sort of 1800s. Yeah, very picturesque and beautiful open skies, lots of big thunderstorms in summer. Yeah, and wildlife, naturally occurring wildlife. We had the occasional leopard on the farm, things like eland, reedbuck, duiker, bushbuck coming through, genet, caracal, serval, these kind of animals passing through just naturally. It was a beef farm, so we farmed a couple of small herds of beef, and
yeah. I've been down that way a little bit, and it's really beautiful, especially those rolling hills leading up to the Drakensberg. There, it's a pretty unbelievable area. So you're growing up around all of this. What were some of your forays into conservation yourself? What was some of the original steps you took to getting more involved?
Obviously going to study after school. I guess initially I did an undergrad where, as a young 18-year-old, didn't put too much thought into what undergrad I was going to do and where I was going to end up. But I went down to Rhodes University in the Eastern Cape and did an undergrad in social science, majoring in geography. And then sort of finding my way. Ended up, traveling a bit after university and going overseas, and had an opportunity. My first opportunity, I guess, working on a reserve formally was, of all places, was in Dubai, on the Dubai Desert Conservation Reserve. A friend of mine was working there, and they needed some guides, and he gave me a shout over email, and one thing led to another, and spent some time over there, which was quite really, really interesting, working in a very different environment to anything I was used to. And so we worked out in the desert there. It was an Arabian oryx breeding and restoration project. And they had an ecotourism lodge there, and we'd take guests out horse riding and camel riding and out into the dunes, and it was pretty surreal, yeah. But certainly not where I thought I would end up, sort of starting off in working in reserves. And from there, ended up coming back to South Africa and started working as a guide at Mala Game Reserve, just in the Sabi Sands. And I started off on the guiding side of things, which I think is a great introduction. There's opportunity there for youngsters, to get out there into the bush, to have a lot of fun, to introduce other people to what it's all about. But I guess behind the scenes, always had a yearning to more work on the conservation side rather than the hospitality and guiding side of things.
Mm-hmm. So, what did you like most about being a guide at that time?
I mean, first of all, it was getting to spend 8 or 10 hours a day out in these amazing places, and then the opportunity to show other people the wildlife of Africa, and from people who had been here many times and had the privilege of traveling to some amazing places, to first timers who literally didn't know what to expect. And so that was quite stimulating, I guess. And then, as I say, just getting to live out in these areas, the day-to-day life of, sometimes you wouldn't have guests and you'd have the opportunity to go and explore the reserves and get out there with, being in these incredible places and getting to watch, behavior of animals and, without disturbing them, I guess is always the key. And seeing how they interact with each other, stuff that, most people only see on TV, and you get a front row seat to that. So that was amazing. As I say, as a youngster who enjoys the bush, it's a great career move And from there, a lot of guys that end up in conservation at some point have guided and use it as a stepping stone to get into something, more behind the scenes and more, as I say, more on the conservation side of things. So.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure you have so many of them, but is there a sighting or something you can kind of recall from those early days that just stuck in your mind that you still remember?
Yeah, I think, what always fascinated me was interaction between different species. And there was one in particular, one on the Sand River down, actually near where there's a camp now called Kirkman's Camp, one of the and beyond lodges down there. And there was just a sighting there, which was absolutely incredible, and lucky enough to be the only vehicle in the area where we had, probably herds of over 100 elephant, pride of lions, and a small herd of 20 or 30 buffalo and a bushbuck all interacting. And the story goes on quite long, so I won't tell the full thing, but it was essentially the lions catching the bushbuck, then being disturbed by the elephants, who then took exception to the lions and ended up, chasing the lions off the bushbuck, who then got out, crossed the river. The elephants then, for some reason, attacked the bushbuck itself. I think at the time, probably because it smelled like a lion, because it had, 10 seconds before, it had 3 lions on top of it. And I remember getting some footage of them actually kicking this bushbuck. The bushbuck ended up surviving. It got caught by the lions again. The elephants chased the lions off again. It crossed the river. And then amongst it all, this buffalo bull, which was what the lions were actually stalking in the first place when the bushbuck appeared. But the buffalo bull took exception to the elephants. And one of the young bull elephants tried to chase the buffalo, and he stood his ground and ended up butting the elephant in its chest. I mean, it sounds unbelievable. And it was. And the elephants then turned and chased this buffalo herd away. The lions eventually caught the bushbuck across the river, and we crossed and went and watched them devour it. But that spanned out over about an hour and a half. It was just incredible. It was like being part of a Nat Geo documentary.
Yeah, exactly, all happening in front of you.
Crazy stuff. Yeah. And there wasn't much to do after that. It was like, okay, let's go back. Yeah. We're not going to top that.
Wow, that's pretty incredible story. Yeah. So you're having all these guiding experiences. You said you kind of in the back of your mind, you were thinking about wanting to do more kind of behind the scenes work with conservation. What was kind of the next step from there?
I guess you probably don't, as a youngster, you don't appreciate what it takes to ensure that these areas are kept in this, in this wild state, and the protection that's required in terms of, keeping these reserves where they are. And I don't think I was, if I'm honest, I wasn't fully appreciative of that at the time. You just think this is an amazing place. But behind the scenes, there are people doing incredible work. You think of, even in that area that I've talked about now, the Sabi Sands was restored over a period of time, transitioned from cattle farming and hunting areas into one of the foremost ecotourism destinations in the world. And there was a lot of hard work that took place behind the scenes, and in terms of trying to ensure that. So I guess over time and through education, you start realizing the monumental effort that it takes to do this. I ended up realizing I needed to get some more skills, formal skills in terms of what I did. And the first one was some more business skills. I knew whatever I was going to do was going to require some kind of business skills. And I went to Wits Business School, Johannesburg, for a year and did a diploma in business management. And then carried on working. I started working for and beyond down at Phinda Game Reserve. And after that, I spent a couple of years down there. And that, I guess, is where I started understanding a little bit more about what it took behind the scenes, working also more on the tourism and lodge side of things, but being exposed to the reserve management side through my colleagues down there, some of which are still down there. And then ended up doing my master's in environmental management. And that's essentially where I started reading a lot more, being exposed to a lot more on the conservation side of things, and trying to just grow my skill set and ultimately transition from the ecotourism side of things onto the conservation side.
Through all of this, did you have any aha moments that you can recall? As you're kind of learning all this, getting more behind the scenes, was there any, how did your perspective start to change from when you were guiding to as you were getting more behind the scenes?
I think, from a guiding point of view, it was, going back, I was 21 when I started guiding. It was all about enjoyment. Yeah? You're just having a good time. You're young, you're having fun, meeting great people, and you just, you're enjoying these areas. Later on, you start, as I say, you start realizing that there's a lot more to it than that, and what it takes to actually, keep these areas like that. And I think, Phinda was a great example of that, of also a restored landscape, a rewilded landscape from the early 90s to when I was there, which was 2006, 7, and 8, somewhere around there. And you start realizing that, to get it to that state, it is possible. First of all, there's so many doom and gloom stories in conservation, but yet there are also these amazing projects like that can keep us inspired and show us what's possible. And you get to meet the real life conservationists, the rangers and reserve managers, and those that have actually been there, done that. And then I think was the inspiration is actually taking a look behind the scenes and realizing, and that's something that a lot of tourists, I don't think, appreciate, because, a lot of the lodges offer you an experience that is all based on enjoyment and exploring these wild areas, but not actually about the realities of what it takes to ensure that we can offer that to tourists. I mean, we don't do conservation for tourists. We do it because it's the right thing to do, and we do it to conserve biodiversity. Tourism is obviously a funding model that can be hugely important and has been shown to be hugely important in the last couple of years.
Yeah. It's funny how many people I've talked to in the space from South Africa, especially, that have ended up working at some point at Phinda. I haven't been there yet, but I feel like it's always comes back. It's kind of this recurring theme of, something that's been done really well and has made a huge difference in conservation. So yeah, it sounds like it's had that influence on you as well. So you mentioned rangers in there. Maybe this is kind of a good way to start transitioning. What are some of your early experiences with rangers, and what connected you to their stories, or, to what they were doing, or gave you kind of a different perspective on what their work was?
I think, just realizing, visiting different reserves and understanding the different roles rangers play, whether it was from translocation of game, who's going to do the work. It's ultimately the rangers on the ground working, alongside people like the vets and chopper pilots, etc. But you start realizing, behind the scenes, that there's this group of people that ultimately, whether it's fixing roads or fences or chasing down poachers or monitoring rhino, they're the ones that do the work. And you start respecting the difficulties and the challenges that they face day to day. I mean, from transitioning into the Game Rangers Association was also an interesting one, in terms of ex-colleague and friend of mine, Chris Scalias, who you might have chatted to over the years. He's now president of the RF. But he said, why don't you come to a meeting? We're having a Game Rangers Association meeting in Cape Idle, which is, you never need an excuse to go to Cape Idle. It's one of my favorite places in South Africa, where you've got sort of bush meets beach, and just a fantastic place. So literally went along there, heard a bit more. I'd heard obviously about the GRAA, but really got exposed to meet, here you've got a group of, can't remember how many people there, but it would have been 80 or 100 rangers who are, were busy. They had a program that they'd put together, and spent some time with them and offered to try and help in some capacity as a volunteer at the time. And that was probably about 12 years ago or so, 10 or 12 years ago. And that was the start of it. Just getting inspired by the people. We had people there from working in all sorts of conservation efforts, in state and private game reserves in South Africa mostly, but also elsewhere in Africa, which was fantastic. We had a chap from Australia, Corey Gill, arrived on his motorbike. He had been going through Africa, visiting different ranger groups. He was a ranger from Australia, and he actually works in Zambia now. But it was just a fantastic few days, and meeting some really inspirational characters from, guys that had been there, done that with, the original Operation Project Rhino in the 1950s and 60s. Ian Player was there. So it was just a fantastic group of people, and could see this is something that can inspire you in terms of trying to assist and try and help these rangers as best we can. Yeah.
What was some of the volunteer work you were doing early on? What did that consist of?
So that was, just working with GRAA, trying to, I guess, do on a path towards professionalizing the association. So helping with, setting up structures and systems from a business management point of view, and I guess focusing our programs on the ranger specifically, rather than just sort of general environmental concerns, and working with the management team on that. And yeah, I like to think we achieved some degree of success there when I look back. Yeah.
Yeah, so either Game Rangers Association of Africa reeled you in or you reeled them in, but eventually you've kind of come to the role that you're currently in. How did that all come about?
Yeah, so one of the things we looked at was, how do we professionalize the association? And one of the things was taking on some project work. We set up a couple of projects which allowed us to build a funding model that would then allow us to take on some more sort of professional time. And so sort of slowly transition into a more capacitated organization where we have, full-time staff members, and that we're very low cost in terms of, there's only two of us that work officially for GRAA, being Louise and myself. But, what we've seen is, taking that step forward and having the capacity to deliver, we needed to take that step, I believe. And I think it's led to us, getting on the right track. And that's, I guess that's probably been in this position for about 6 or 7 years now. So we've set aside a portion of my time, about 80% of my time is with GRAA, which is fantastic and which allows me to focus really on trying to deliver benefits for rangers.
Yeah. Do you know the history of GRAA and how it kind of came about? Was Ian Player a part of that at the beginning? What was the organization originally set up for?
Yeah, so I mean, it's, when you chat to some of our founder members, of which, there many are still going and active in the association. I mean, we got an email this week from one of our founder members, Paul Dutton, recommending someone for honorary membership as an example. So it's fantastic to have some of the guys that have really been there from the start, still involved in the association. John Forrest's another one. But yeah, so essentially, when you chat to these guys, the first meeting was, a notice was sent out in 1970 to a group of rangers working mostly in uKhahlamba-Drakensberg at the time, and a couple from some of the other reserves in Kwazulu-Natal, and saying, we need to think about getting together. And they were worried about declining standards in conservation, and how do we formalize something which, represents rangers and their interests in conservation. And that was literally the first step. And fantastic thing is, in the archives, we've got those original notices to attend the meeting documented. Doc Player wasn't a founder member, but he was very much involved in the early beginnings of GRAA and served as our patron for many years until his death a few years ago.
Yeah. And I guess around that time too we talk about the current rhino poaching crisis, but the white rhino was almost lost at that time, right? And Ian Player and his group really played a huge role in that. So this was all kind of happening around the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's something that, I always think sometimes as conservationists, we focus on the future and where we are now, but we've often got to step back and take a look at where we've come from. And I mean, the white rhino and even the black rhino is a great story in that regard. And that although as terrible as the last 10, 15 years has been for rhino, if we look at where we came from with the white rhino, with numbers getting down to below 50 at one point, at the turn of the century, from a small population, to think that every single white rhino that exists, southern white rhino, comes from the same stock of 50 that was in uKhahlamba-Drakensberg. It's really incredible to think that we managed to, and that was done by rangers. Rangers managed to save the white rhino, and the effort behind that was huge. And you think of where we sit today of, trying to resave it in a way. But the fact that, populations have grown, even black rhino, if you look at, I remember as a kid watching productions like Horn of Sorrow, which came to our school, all about rhino poaching in the 80s and how we were going to lose the rhino. And, black rhino numbers were down to 2,000 odd in the early 90s. And today we sit with over 5,000 black rhino, which is incredible to think. Obviously, things are under threat again. Unfortunately, that's the story of conservation, is these waves of threat. Yeah. But if you think of where we've come from, I think we need to reflect on that sometimes. What lessons did we learn during those times? Things like range expansion. If you chat to the guys involved in the original Operation Rhino, and you read Doc Player's books, and expanding that range was really crucial. And today it still remains that. We need to ensure habitat for these animals. We need to be bold and move them into areas where we know we can protect them and where their populations can grow optimally. So I think there are lots of lessons to be learned.
Yeah, and I've only read the White Rhino saga, Ian Player's book. It's a pretty incredible book, especially when you realize how little they knew. I mean, they were just kind of making it up, especially when it came to darting rhinos and things like that. And
Yeah.
I've been on a couple of rhino dehornings, and just that whole operation that takes place. I mean, none of that knowledge was known back then.
Yeah.
And somehow they managed to, like you said, bring back the rhinos from somewhere around 50 individuals, which is a pretty incredible story. So.
Yeah, I mean, you do. You read those books and you realize that, it was real life experimentation with the drugs, trying to find a solution. They knew that this was a solution. And Dr. Tony Hartshorn and Dr. Blair and a couple of others, and then those early days. And yet we still use a lot of what they learned back then now. It's just incredible. And obviously have sort of perfected it. And now we have, we don't have to chase rhinos on horseback anymore. We've got helicopters and, the techniques obviously refined to such a state now where we really have got it pretty well tapped in terms of how to do it. And it all stems back to those original days. It really, like you said, it's incredible. And, they were bold. These days they would probably be head up on social media for what they were trying to do. And the armchair critics would have had a full go at them, but they believed in what they were doing, and what they achieved is, not debatable.
Yeah, and it also gives hope for, I was just talking with Barney Long from Rewild, and he focuses a lot on the Javan and Sumatran rhinos, and their numbers are below 100. And yeah, those kind of stories give hope to those types of projects that, we can bring these species back from the brink. So yeah, always good to look at our past and kind of get reminded about what we've done before.
Yeah.
So moving on to rangers a little bit in more depth, you said at a certain point, GRAA started focusing more specifically on rangers. Can you talk about that? And also, what were the reasons that you guys started focusing more heavily on rangers and trying to support them?
Just to be clear, the mission has always been about the ranger. It was just, about, as I say, about 10, 12 years ago, saying, okay, how do we refine that a bit more and focus specifically? Everything we do must be focused on the ranger. And there's so many different environmental concerns that rangers might be concerned about, but as a GRAA, what makes us unique, our focus is on the ranger. So that was always part of the true calling. And if you go back to the original objectives of the association, that was very much front and center of why GRAA was established. And so it was just revisiting that. And
Yeah. It was just like that mission creep where you start like, well, we can help here and here. And then it's like, okay, let's refocus. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also, expanding. So looking at, we want to be the Game Rangers Association of Africa. We need to work on expanding into other countries. We need to ensure that we benefit rangers across borders, and really focusing on that and growing our reach into the continent. I remember we did a strategic session with the scenario planner, Clem Santa. I remember him saying to us, are you guys sure you want to be focusing on Africa? That's a big task. and we kind of looked across at each other and we said, yeah, we committed to that. We have to, we can't, we don't see another way. We realize it's a massive task, but we see massive value there. And I think, when we deal with our colleagues in different countries, we realize, the role that we must play as the voice of the ranger across borders.
Why is it important to have an association that focuses on these rangers, like you said, across borders? What kind of support do they need? What are you seeing?
I think, if you look at most conservation efforts, they're led by a species, and they're species specific. So they focus on a certain species, or in some areas they might focus on a specific park. Friends of X park or save the X species. If you think of all those, and even the latest, this whole say protect 30% of the planet by 2030. Not many people understand that to do all these things, to save the rhino, to save the elephant, to save the pangolin, to save Gorongosa, National Park in Mozambique, or Virunga, in DRC, you need rangers. You need well-supported, well-trained, skilled, cared for, and well-led ranger teams on the ground. And there's no way around that. That's the hard truth of the matter. Is people, you need people on the ground. And that's your ranger force. And we think it's an incredibly important cause that we're part of. We know it from chatting to our members that they need a rallying cause, I guess. That the rangers' voices must be heard. We often see conservation decisions taken without people speaking to rangers, and they're left to deal with the consequences of policy and of decisions made in far-off boardrooms. Yeah, and we don't think that's fair. We think rangers are the ones that should be part of these discussions and part of these decision-making forums. Yeah.
This might be a kind of a tough question to answer, but what do you see the role of a ranger in Africa specifically? I mean, you guys are focusing on Africa, but it's such it's a huge continent. But can you kind of talk about some of these different roles? You kind of went over some of them just now, but what types of different things are rangers doing on the grounds?
Yeah, so it's one of our areas of work is to try and highlight the diverse and critical role of rangers. Obviously, there's a huge part of their work around law enforcement, and we can't. That's part of the job, and has always been part of the job as a ranger, is ensuring laws are abided to in these areas where they work. So, but it's also an area where, I guess if you asked the average person or you went onto a Google image search, you would find, a picture of a ranger with a gun, probably wearing camouflage or military type uniforms, and that's the reality. In many places, that is this one of the 80% of the time will be spent on law enforcement activities of maintaining the territorial integrity of these areas where they work. But yet there's so much more to being a ranger than that. And that's what we try and highlight is all the other things rangers do. And in fact, there are many rangers that are unarmed that work in wildlife monitoring, for example, or work in areas where rangers can't be armed. There's some countries in Africa which it's against the law for rangers to carry a weapon, and they would have to patrol with the army or with the police, who would then carry the firearm. So it's just highlighting the different aspects. And I mean, broadly speaking, you're looking at law enforcement, you look at wildlife monitoring, being a huge component of ranger work, whether you're monitoring gorillas, giraffes, pangolins, rhinos, monitoring the status of those populations. And also don't forget the plants. The rangers working in many areas that will be mapping out rare and indigenous threatened plants. So from a biological monitoring point of view, extremely important. Obviously, what we call like general conservation management activities, so things like alien clearing, in some areas, exceptionally important. Also, erosion control, fixing roads, fences, very unexciting work, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not glamorous.
Not glamorous, but fixing. Who's going to fix the roads and fences if the rangers don't? It's what they do. So there's fighting fires, either lighting or fighting fires. Sometimes rangers' work is to do controlled burns and light fires. Other times you're fighting fires and trying to prevent wildfires from decimating portions of a reserve or protect infrastructure or farmland. So, there's multitude of things rangers do. There's also the community work. There's sometimes a misconception around rangers and communities, but I always say to people, must remember rangers are from communities. They often live, nearby reserves. They're often part of communities that rely on protected and conserved areas for benefits. And the rangers are your interface between community and conservation. They form great ambassadors for conservation in the communities, and there's a lot of work that they do. In some areas, human-wildlife conflict. Rangers are sent out to deal with that and to try and mitigate those conflicts. And that's also something that is not widely understood, I think, outside of Africa, is the level of conflict between humans and wildlife in some areas where there's no fences and where people are living with large megafauna, raiding crops, killing livestock, and the impacts on those on people in these areas. So those are just some of the jobs that rangers will do. And then importantly, and this is another one, is the different environments that they work, and the two big ones being terrestrial and marine. Marine rangers are often forgotten about in many conversations, but you think of the task at hand in terms of trying to protect and conserve our oceanscapes. It really is some incredible work being done there by rangers, and the odds that they face on the oceans are huge. And I think a lot more work needs to be done in that space as well. So marine environments, hugely important. And then, obviously the different environments on the terrestrial side of things, mountains, forests, down in the Western Cape in South Africa, fynbos, deserts. Rangers work across multitude of, it's not just in savanna environments with big five, They work with geometric tortoises and, special species like that all across the continent, and each of their jobs is important.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean it's interesting because you list all these different roles that they play, and a lot of these rangers actually play all of those roles. I mean, some are more specialized, but most of them, it's that I've met in South Africa at least, have, they do all of those. They're doing the law enforcement, but then they're also fixing the roads, the controlled fire, burns, community engagement, all that stuff. So it's always impresses me how many skills that they have to be able to do their job. And I mean, so many of them. And then on top of that, in a lot of these areas, they have to face pressure from the corruption that kind of around the different illegal trades. So it's, they have to have a certain level of integrity. So it's just, most of the men and women I've met that are rangers, just, you're kind of instantly impressed by them and the quality of human that they are.
Yeah. Yeah. And you need that, to operate in these environments, you need loosely termed like bush skills. Yeah? You need to be able to be comfortable in your environment. If you work in an environment with dangerous game, you need to be comfortable with that. And those skills, tracking and bushcraft are not something that are learned overnight. Yeah, this is years of work. It's not something that is easy to teach either. It's experience. It's people that have grown up in these environments, and I think it's something that's often, sadly, it's overlooked. There's a misconception that you can just come and teach rangers how to do their job. Some of the technical skills are actually some of the easiest to master. If you think of it, in terms of teaching someone how to use a GPS or even how to clean and use a firearm, that's quite a technical skill, and it can be relatively easily taught. The bushcraft, on the other hand, is exceptionally complex, and very few people have mastered the art of it. And being able to teach and hand over those skills to others, and that's incredibly important. Rangers have got to be highly skilled in terms of keeping themselves safe, one, and in terms of being able to operate in those environments to do their work, whether it's getting up close to a rhino to see what ear notches it's got so you know which animal it is, or being able to track a poacher over 14 to 25 kilometers during a day. Those are key skills and are not easily learned. So I think there's one of the drives at the moment is around professionalizing the industry and recognizing rangers as professionals, and that they are. The truly skilled ranger is a consummate professional who understands how to work in these really complex and changing environments.
Yeah, and I think I want to dive into that here shortly, but I just wanted to mention, I just recently talked with James Mwenda from Kenya, and he was a ranger at Olbejeta and was with Sudan, the last northern white rhino, for a while. But he was talking about his time as a ranger, and like you mentioned, I mean, he was unarmed that whole time, just had a stick, and he's out there with, Big Five, and he just had to get so in touch with the environment and being able to read the wildlife to be able to just survive out there and be able to kind of work with the wildlife. And it's so impressive to me. I mean, I've spent relatively little time in comparison out in the bush, and you kind of realize how dangerous it can be if you're not able to respect and read the wildlife and your surroundings. So yeah, just the skills like that are just so complex, and the knowledge is almost intuitive that, it's not easy to just teach that, like, how to load a rifle or something like that. So it's just impressive how many skills they have and how complex a lot of these skills are.
Yeah. And as you said earlier, John, the ranger carries out many of these different roles. Like you said, they can do all of them. They can do the law enforcement, the monitoring, the conservation management, the community work, etc. And then, so that is what I'd call a sort of general field ranger. Has some kind of capability in all those aspects, but there is a specializations, as you mentioned. So these days you do get specialized counter poaching rangers, but they'll unfortunately spend all their time on that aspect of the job, and then because of the poaching pressures, it might fill their day, as it were, just carrying out those duties. Things like canine handlers, obviously highly specialized, and then you might get specialized rangers working in human wildlife conflict too. They focus on that particular aspect. But it's really important that they've been grounded in all the skills and understanding the conservation, because ultimately, you're working as part of this, as a small cog in this industry, and understanding the different roles that are needed in the field. You can't work in isolation. They're all interlinked and they all rely on each other. And, a reserve needs capability across all these areas to function efficiently and effectively.
Yeah. Yeah. All these conservation areas and efforts are a huge, complex group of different individuals with different specializations working together. So definitely to be able to understand each other and work with each other is important. Can we move into the challenges that you see for a lot of rangers today, and then we can kind of talk about some of the solutions. But what are a lot of the things that rangers are facing that GRAA are kind of coming to the aid of?
I think one of the things is just the conditions that rangers work under, and being able to understand what those are, and that if we're expecting all of this of rangers, that we really need to support them at that, what I'd call the sort of base level. And that would be things that directly impact on their welfare or their well-being. So are we providing rangers with adequate pay packages? Are they earning a decent living wage? Do they have the ability to stay in a place of comfort when they return from their what may be a 14 to 21 day patrol? Do they have access to drinking water, to a place to wash? And sadly, often the answer to those questions is often no. Do they have adequate uniforms? And here we're not talking high level stuff. We're talking about basics, socks, boots, uniforms, something to keep warm when it's cold, mosquito net at night. As I say, the ability to wash and when you come back from patrol. So sometimes it's the really basic stuff. And I guess that's sometimes the frustration is, people want to work at a really high level, but often rangers are lacking the very basics, life insurance, medical evacuation cover. Often these things are lacking at ground level, and yet we expect rangers to perform miracles without a level of support. So those are what we'd call your almost like your ranger basic needs. I think sometimes we get a bit too technical and we want to focus on all these high level aspects, but often, how can we hand a ranger a $1,000 piece of technology to carry on patrol when we can't, when he's got holes in his socks or has boots that are, the soles coming away from the leather. I think it's very unfair on them, and we need to ensure that there's a level of support for them. When we look at what we're asking rangers to do, they deserve that. They deserve a level of support at that very basic need, at least.
Do you have a sense in Africa, and I mean, I know it varies country to country, but like what percentage of rangers are getting the support that they deserve?
So there's actually a report in progress at the moment that we're working, RF, URSA, which is the Universal Ranger Support Alliance, and RF being the International Ranger Federation, and then the regional associations, obviously in Africa being GRAA, called the State of the Ranger Report, and that'll be released next year. But that's going to really delve down into some of these. There has been feedback over the last 5 years or so. WWF has run a couple of surveys. We know things like, I think it's around 50% of rangers that were surveyed don't have life insurance, as an example. Mm-hmm. We know how rangers have answered in terms of have they got the required level of training, etc. But the reality, I guess the short answer is we know that there's massive gaps. Mm-hmm. So now it's about coming up with programs. While we compile these reports and surveys and that, we need to start doing the work. We know there's a need. GRAA itself has we've had our own project running for the last 5 years or so. We've been to about 35 different parks and done pretty in-depth surveys on what's needed at the ground level. So we base almost all of our programs on that, on real need as opposed to perceived need, mm-hmm. and realizing where the best use of any funding that may come in is, and it's often at that really what I'd call sort of basic ranger needs level.
Yeah. And can you talk about any maybe success stories or where you've seen improvement in an area and how that's changed the rangers' view of themselves, view of their work, view of their working conditions? I mean, how's that shift the way that they kind of hold themselves and work? I mean, I imagine that it has some kind of effect when you go from holes in your socks to like a nice uniform and better pay and things like that. I don't know if you have any of those success stories. You don't have to name any organization or place, but just seeing that shift, what that kind of effect has.
Yes, I mean, motivation is crucial to an effective ranger team. You got to keep the team motivated, and obviously there's the utility value of boots and uniforms and backpacks, and even on the skills side of sending rangers for training and investing in them, or providing them with solar power in their ranger base or hot water, whatever it is. But the unseen part of that is often on what impact does that have on morale, and it does have an impact. And I don't think that's been adequately mapped, because I think we often, if you read donor reports and that, it's we trained 100 rangers, or we handed out 100 pairs of boots. But what is the impact of that? And it's really hard to measure. I was asked that question the other day, and I said it's really, really hard to measure. Ultimately, one of the biggest impacts is effective leadership, and that's sadly what's lacking in many protected areas, is effective ranger leaders who are supported to be able to motivate and manage their teams. And that's where I think a lot of investment is needed, is really at that junior and middle and senior ranger management level, and ensuring those rangers are skilled, are capable, and are the right people to lead those teams. A leader can literally make or break a ranger team, depending on how they lead them. So leadership is a huge area that needs to be addressed in many places. And I think, capable leaders can make a huge difference in ensuring that the ranger teams are well supported. And that comes with, a leader knowing what rangers need, having maybe walked the walk themselves, of understanding, that we can't expect rangers to perform miracles without a level of support on the ground, of understanding what rangers are capable of selecting the right rangers to perform that work, and to be able to impart and share the knowledge that they've gained with their teams. So that's really crucial. Yeah.
So we talked a lot about the equipment and kind of basic needs, but you guys also focus on, maybe this is kind of related to the leadership as well as education and skills training and stuff. So how are you guys getting involved in that?
Yeah, so we set up probably, I guess, 10 or 12 years ago, we set up a bursary fund where we try each year to raise some money and then send rangers on various skills training. And those can focus on specialized skills like tracking and advanced rifle handling, etc., to more sort of general skills like patrol leadership and general leadership skills. So, that program's been successful. I mean, one of the things there is what we've seen is I think some of the success in that has been on the motivational side. And once again, I say it's hard to map that, but bringing a team of rangers together from Ivory Coast, Nigeria, South Africa, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, a group of 12. So it's a highly immersive and engaging environment, and letting them spend 2 weeks together learning how to track or learning how to improving their patrol leadership skills. Obviously, that there's a skill takeaway, which is important, but there's a whole unexplored area there in terms of, first of all, developing a network of amongst other professionals, which is very much what GRAA is about, building ranger networks. And the other one is about those rangers going back to the area of work motivated. Someone's invested in them. Someone's taken the time to look at their application to come to that training, and they've also been stimulated by interacting with the trainers, but also with their colleagues. And we see occasionally, still see photographs of training that happened maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where the guys will share photos and say, "Just remember this. It was great to meet you." We've got a few WhatsApp groups where we try and keep the rangers connected with each other. But there's a huge benefit to that, which is, I guess, in some ways sort of undiscovered. So GRAA, we kind of work across 3 pillars. One is building networks. Mm-hmm. Second is representing rangers. So you've got to have a network to represent, but representing them as the voice of the ranger, making sure the real issues on the ground are highlighted, that people understand the work of rangers, etc. So networks, representation, and then the third pillar is around supportive projects. And then we've got a couple of key ones in there. One of which is what we call ranger skills, which is around training. We have ranger gear around basic equipment provision. We've got a great boot project that sits within the Ranger Gear project at the moment, and various other ones, profiling rangers correctly, called the Ranger Legacy Project. Ranger Care, which is about Medivac and life and disability insurance for rangers. And that's where we say, okay, as an association, it's not good enough just to build networks and represent rangers, which I think if you look at professional bodies in other professions, that's often what they focus on, building networks and representing the profession. What we're saying is we must do that, and we must also try and put some supportive projects in place where we can improve the lives and the capabilities of rangers in the field for conservation benefit.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder if we could talk a little bit more about the networks building side, because I think for rangers specifically, it's something that's really important. From what I've been seeing is, like we were saying, so many of these rangers spend like maybe a month or more on deployment in these areas, and other than maybe one or two rangers that are a part of their team, they don't really get to interact with too many people. And sometimes it's hard for them to even get to see their families, let alone other rangers in different areas. And so what do you see the importance of bringing the rangers together, and how are you guys going about that? I mean, this training experience is like one way to kind of organically do that, but what are some other ways that you're going about trying to connect rangers?
So it's difficult because, as you say, rangers work often in remote areas. Often, comms is limited. The communications is exceptionally important to any ranger team, but often it's limited to them communicating with HQ, with the home base via the radio. They might not have a cellular network, or certainly, most rangers don't have access to the internet on a day-by-day basis. So to communicate with them becomes a struggle. I think where we're lucky in terms of it is becoming easier thanks to technological advancements. So in the old days, even getting rangers together for an annual general meeting was sending out a letter through the post office. At least these days we can communicate by email. What we found useful is a forum like WhatsApp, very basic, but the ability to be able to share stories, photographs. What are you up to today? This is the case I was involved with. This is the sentence the poacher got. So those kind of things, as basic as they sound, I think are really important. What we don't want is rangers being isolated from each other. It's very easy to happen where you work in your park, and some rangers will spend their entire careers working in one park and not kind of realizing where they fit in the bigger picture of African conservation. And I think through ranger associations, at a national and at a regional level and at RF level, it's important that rangers get exposed to, wow, we're part of something bigger than this. We estimate in Africa that there are over 40,000 rangers. We don't quite have a grasp on that number. 5 years ago, we said 20,000, and the more we scratch, the more we find. So there's a lot of people in the same boat as you as a ranger. They're working in different parks. They might have experienced similar challenges that you face. They might experience very different challenges to you, but it's all about building that community of practice and that network, sharing experiences, just knowing that, that there are others out there facing, similar odds to you, and trying to build some camaraderie, across the Ranger Corps. A fantastic event that we're involved in is the Wildlife Ranger Challenge over the last couple of years, which is a sort of COVID relief project that approached us through Natural State and Tusk and ourselves and a couple of other partners. And seeing the camaraderie there of having getting together, running, having an event we can all focus on has been fantastic. And once again, over 15 million US has hit the ground through that project. But the value in terms of motivation, camaraderie is untapped. We don't know, we can't put a figure to that, but it's, we see the results. We see smiling rangers and enthusiastic supporters of the challenges. And I think that's where keeping these networks going, and they must be supportive networks. You know what I mean? It can be rangers lending an ear, or it could be through support in terms of job opportunities, which we try and circulate to our members and to rangers. There must be a level of support both ways. And I think it's really important, that we're part of something bigger here, working in conservation.
I think you have something like this, but I'm not 100% sure. Is there something like the IRF's World Ranger Congress that's specific to Africa, and some awards that are kind of connected to that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the African Ranger Congress, which was started. We hosted the first one of that at the Southern African Wildlife College, which you're very familiar with, in 2018. And then it's been postponed a couple of times due to COVID. But this year we'll be hosting the second one of those up in Kasane, in Botswana, and that's endorsed by RF. That's about getting rangers together. What we've seen, interestingly enough, in the last couple of years when we've had virtual meetings, is we can now access rangers in different areas because travel is obviously a limiting factor in getting funds for travel. But we've had some really successful meetings in the last couple of years and well attended, by rangers all over the continent, because we now have platforms like this, Zoom and Google Meet and these kind of things, which we didn't think was possible a few years back. So I think some kind of hybrid model is going to be really exciting going forward, where we can get a core group together and then link into virtual participants who can't make the journey. Looking forward to the Ranger Congress this year. And then we have an awards program. It's been historically called the Rhino Conservation Awards, but a few years back started looking beyond just rhino conservation. And this year it's rebranded as the African Conservation Awards, which we'll also be hosting at the Ranger Congress. And it's about recognizing individuals and organizations working in the ranger space. And really, I think recognizing them importantly as their own profession. I think there's a lot of sort of value in that, is that you recognize by your colleagues, rather than an outside grouping or that your colleagues are saying well done and that means something to a ranger. So that's really important as well, and also fits into that keeping motivation, rangers connected and motivated, and also as a good opportunity to highlight some other great projects and personalities in the ranger world to those outside the profession.
Yeah, I have to try to make it to that event. I was at the last World Ranger Congress, and it's just so great to see all of these rangers from all over the world getting together, and just this energy, that kind of flows between people, and just shared experiences, like you said. I think for anyone in any industry, it's always great to just connect with other people that have similar stories but come from different places, and you can share those experiences.
Yeah, I think the last World Ranger Congress, unfortunately, I wasn't there, but we had a GRAA delegation that was there. But it really has been a turning point in the profession, in terms of out of that Congress in Nepal, a lot of things have sprung from that. One being the URSA Ranger Action Plan, which together with various partners, we're all working on some aspects of that, in terms of saying, okay, it's not good enough just to meet up every 3 or 4 years. What's the body of work that's needed in between that? Who's going to support it? Who's going to fund it? And let's make some strides between congresses. So next year is the World Ranger Congress in Portugal, in Azores. It'll be fascinating, getting feedback on how the action plan's going. We work closely with RF, obviously, and they're part of the URSA Alliance, and GRAA is recently part of the URSA Alliance as well. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be exciting to really report back on that and what's been achieved in those years and what still needs to be done. So we certainly can't do it all in 3 years, but I think there's been, from what we've seen, there's been a lot of work done and some major achievements.
Yeah, it seems like all these organizations are growing and growing, and more people are attending these events. So it's great to see that. And going back to the communication side of it too, it's going to be interesting when something like Starlink completely comes online, and all of a sudden, pretty much anywhere in Africa, around anywhere in the world, you'll be able to have internet access, which will really connect people, especially rangers that are out in these remote areas. So I feel like a lot of positive things will come from that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's some game changers like that waiting, which will be be interesting to see how we all adapt to it and that, but certainly it will be a positive thing in terms of connecting rangers.
I guess it's kind of going back to, a lot of these rangers don't get the support they need, but why do you think that is? Why do you think a lot of these different, I don't know if it's with your experience more like at a government level, or if it's just, there's a lot of private reserves too, but why do you think they're not getting that support?
I think one of the things is, I like to think that people, once they understand the role of the ranger, understand why they deserve that support. So I think one aspect is creating awareness around the critical role that rangers play. And that's why we look to try and, in some way, make an effort in that area. I think more people need to get out, in terms of spending time with rangers, seeing what they do. Like I say, I think often there's decisions and policies made without the understanding of the conditions on the ground and understanding of what we're expecting rangers to do. And the more we can get decision makers, politicians, and the like to understand the role of the ranger and how critical it is to support them, because without them, how are you going to achieve what's needed in these areas? They need to be supported.
Yeah.
They need to be, as I said, well led. There's obviously a whole bunch of aspects that need to be catered for in terms of skills development, training, decent selection, having the right people on the ground, integrity management you mentioned earlier. There's no doubt about it, and it's something that is skirted around sometimes. But corruption in Africa is a massive problem, and how do we deal with that in the Ranger Corps? Are we being proactive enough? What sort of policies around recruitment and integrity management do we have when people are working with valuable and species, that, like you said, there's the temptation of these criminal syndicates working in that same space. And how do we mitigate some of the risks there? I think is important.
Yeah. I mean, especially like thinking about someone out there that's not getting the support they need, where they have holes in their socks and their boots are falling apart, and maybe they get this really expensive piece of equipment, but they don't even have fresh water, and then you expect them to not buckle under pressure from someone that's going to give them money to do something illegal. So it's just, I mean, starting at that fundamental level is huge, and then building on that.
Yeah, you got to look after the people. It's in any industry. If you want to retain rangers and keep them motivated and honest, there's a certain level of support that you need to deliver to them. Obviously, there's other things, and like I say, in terms of the right selection but without looking after your teams, we're never going to pay the best salaries in conservation. That's just how it is. Unfortunately, we really should do better. But it's not about saying rangers need to be the best paid profession, and that. It's about saying there's a level of support that these people deserve. They're working in this critical space of which the health of the planet relies on them, and they deserve a level of support. And we need to ensure that they get that.
Do you have any stories of, ranger that you've kind of been out in the bush with or worked with that it stands out in your mind as kind of like this is like the type of ranger to look up to? I mean, I'm sure I have so many experiences myself, and I haven't been out there that much. I'm just trying to think if there's anything you could tell just to give people a sense of what these men and women are like out there in the bush.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, there's a lot of good examples of that. I would, if I was battling to try and think of one, it would be sad. But there's some great examples of, and that's one thing we need to look at, is ranger role models. And fortunately, through things like the Rhino Conservation Awards, we've been able to shine a bit of a light on some of them. And there's obviously many more. There are many people doing incredible stuff that are unnoticed, unheard of. And I always say to people, just be careful of social media in this regard, because those with the best PR budgets tend to win the acclaim and win the adoration through Instagram and Facebook. But yet there are people doing an even more incredible job against much higher odds that don't have the time to post on Instagram or don't have a PR budget to highlight the work that they do, but do incredible work out there. I mean, I'll just go on recent experience. So when was it, a week ago or so, I was up in Zimbabwe, and we were working with the guys at Sabi Valley Conservancy, the Special Species Protection Unit, and the ATS, Anti-Poaching Tracking Specialists, who's led by Bryce Clements. But there, in that unit itself, so now you're looking at a microcosm of conservation in Africa. Guys working, protecting rhino in a really high-risk environment, private land in Zimbabwe. You talk about against all odds. That's really challenging environment, but yet doing incredible work. And I mean, I've been lucky to spend a bit of time with them over the years, but you'll meet, individuals there that just have incredible stories, that have grown up in neighboring communities, that have, just thinking of ranger, the first one that springs to mind is Matthias. I mean, Matthias he was too old to be a ranger. The guys were looking for someone slightly younger. I think he was 34, 36 at the time. He put his head down and said, no, that's not a barrier to me, and got through the selection process, and is now, not only is an expert tracker and dog handler, but he's also had some. Yeah, he survived a bout of malaria where he was nearly killed a couple of years back, about 2 years ago. He's also involved in a community project. We went and visited with him. And there's someone who's inspirational to his community. He's spent time in that clinic that he supports now and has got, support too. And that's where he went when he had severe malaria. He's got family members that work there. And yet, he's working across the road in this conservancy. You talk about a professional, highly skilled at what he does, incredible tracking skills, expert dog handler, and then leader, a real team leader if ever there was one. That's what keeps me motivated, is meeting people like that. And if you get out to these projects, you can find them. There are other projects where you go where you can walk away disheartened, by what you find, where rangers have lost the plot, normally under bad leadership. To be honest, it's not the rangers themselves, but poor leadership have been allowed to get to a point where they're no longer effective in the field. And then you can go to a project like that in Sabi and really be inspired and saying, okay, this is what's capable. It requires, what people don't see is what it takes to get to that level. It's exceptionally tough work, and it's hard work, and it's relentless, and it's day and night. And all the time you're trying to upskill your team to that level. You're being bombarded with bushmeat poachers and attempts on the rhino under your protection. And it really is tough. And as I say, that's what inspires me, is to meet people. I mean, Bryce himself is the real leader of his team. He's out there with them in the bush, highly skilled individual and surrounded by a fantastic team, So it's important to find those projects that are really leading from the front, that can inspire the other rangers. Show us what we as a professional are capable of and where we should be. It's a whole lot of fun as well, jumping in the bush with them and going out and patrol and seeing these skilled operators at work.
I wish more people would have that experience. Going out with a guide is an awesome experience as well, but being able to spend time with the rangers out in the field is just a whole different way of seeing things. And that's when you really get to connect and see how much knowledge they have, not only as the protectors of the space, but, knowledge of the flora and the fauna and the ecosystem as a whole and everything that goes into conservation. So, I think sharing these stories and finding ways to tell more of their stories, there's so many amazing men and women that are doing this job that it's not hard to find these stories to be able to share with people. But I think those stories do have influence and hopefully will help bring some of these changes to fruition a little faster. So is there anything else you want to say kind of just around rangers and maybe more about how other people could get involved in supporting rangers, either through GRAA or other avenues?
I think, it's awareness is a massive thing. I mean, sometimes we get tired of the word because it's, awareness without results is sometimes frustrating, but we do need awareness. We need awareness of what rangers do. We need awareness of where rangers should be capability-wise. We need awareness of the diverse roles that they play and why it's important to support them. That's the critical thing here, is people need to understand why are rangers important, and we need rangers to share their story. A lot of rangers just want to carry on and do the work. They don't have time to share their stories, but we really need to share those, and that's one of the roles that we can play. You guys are playing it in your own way through Rhino Man and these kind of initiatives and getting stories out. The more people, I really do believe this, is that the more people that understand rangers and their work, the more support they'll get. So that's a sort of long-term thing, is we need to, and if we're honest with ourselves as a profession, we've probably failed in terms of we've just wanted to carry on with the work and not wanted to talk about it as much, and just because often rangers are results driven, but yet we need to keep the dialogue going. We need to talk about what rangers do and then expose people to their world. It's so foreign to most people. It really is so foreign to most people that when you explain or when they see what rangers do, it's something that's hard to visualize. If you're sitting in an apartment block in New York, it's really difficult to to think what these rangers go through on a day-to-day basis and the odds at which they face. Like you say, long days, weeks on end away from their ranger base, sleeping out in the bush, climbing trees away from rhinos, and running away from militia groups in the Congo. And it really is huge odds that they face. And I think that would be a big thing in terms of increasing the awareness. And then, looking for projects that are delivering, results on the ground. And as I say, sometimes it's not all about what's on social media. Sometimes you've got to really do your homework. You've got to, chat to the people on the ground, chat to rangers. We work with a bunch of different projects that we're very supportive of in terms of exposing the work that they do. I like to think, if people want advice, they're welcome to contact us. We've obviously got our own projects that we do, but we also have fantastic members. We've got over 1,800 ranger members in the organization that all do fantastic work, and we're happy to help point people in the right direction. And you've got to find something that connects to you, as a supporter of, are you going to support this particular project? Are you going to support a particular species? So rangers that work with rhinos or rangers that work with pangolins. And I would say that, getting behind the people in conservation is where we need a slight shift in mindset in terms of those that want to help. We need to get behind the people, and those are the rangers.
Yeah, because I think if you want to protect a species, ultimately, what are you doing? You're supporting the people that are protecting that species, and most of the time it's the rangers that are on the ground doing that work. What do you lose if there are no rangers?
Pretty much everything, unfortunately. If you think of these conservation areas, there's always rangers on the ground in the successful models. And as I say, they're doing many different aspects, not just all about the law enforcement, but we need people on the ground. You can't think of a successful conservation project without, a capable ranger team on the ground. It doesn't exist in my mind. So, unfortunately, if you remove the ranger, you lose the species.
Is there anything else you'd like to leave us with before we end this?
Yeah, I think just obviously thanks to you guys for bringing some attention to rangers and the work they do through Rhino Man and through the stuff that you do. I think it's really important. It's not no one organization's gonna turn the tide here. We need a group of supportive and collaborating partnerships, and those, true, what I'd call true ranger supporters, and GRAA is one of them, and there are many others, and so we love working with like-minded people, and well done to you guys and what you've done. And then just a plea to those that might take the time to listen to this. First of all, thank you for listening, and secondly, get behind rangers. They really are a worthwhile cause.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you for all the time that you've put into supporting rangers over the years and what GRAA is doing. And really looking forward to seeing rangers become a more valued member of the conservation space. So really appreciate this conversation.
Oh, awesome, John. Thanks, man. Have a fantastic rest of the day. And thanks again.
You as well. Thank you for listening to the Rhino Man podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you're excited to see the film succeed, please subscribe and review our podcast on Spotify and iTunes. Then follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Rhino Man the Movie. More details about Rhino Man, the social impact campaign, and future screenings are at rhinomanthemovie.org. To learn more about the Global Conservation Corps and their work, visit globalconservationcorps.org. Sign up for the newsletter and follow GCC on all of the social platforms. If you like this podcast, make sure to subscribe and catch up on GCC's Voices of Nature podcast, where Bob Ludke interviews a wide range of people who've dedicated their lives to making a difference in conservation. A special thanks goes out to Simone Wilson for the music for this podcast. He's the brilliant composer for Rhino Man the Movie. Learn more about his work at simonewilsonmusic.com. Until next time, I'm John Jerko, and this is the Rhino Man Podcast.